initially, when you're traditionally introducing giving or generosity, there are 4 aspects that are talked about: to whom you give, what you give, how you give, and why you give. And in this talk, I wanted to focus particularly on the what we give, and also touch a bit on the how and why. So when we look at the sort of the what we give, there are also, again, traditional sublists, which is very, very helpful. And there is one for what we give. And there's a traditional list of 6 that we tend to use within this Triratna context. There are other traditional lists where it makes it 4. But the first of those things is that we can give well, it's called food, clothing, and shelter, but basically we can give in a material sense. And then the second is giving the gift of fearlessness, which I really like, and we'll come back to. Giving the gift of education and culture, of life itself, of merit, and then ultimately the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha. So I'm just going to highlight a few of those rather than go into all of them. But the one that I wanted to highlight first is this thing about giving material things. So the sort of food, clothing, shelter. But as I say, it's often better to sort of think about it in sort of terms of money, time, and energy, sort of giving our money, time, and energy. And I think one of the things that's helpful to also look at that is whether we're then giving, in quite a sort of engaged, close-up way, or quite hands-off. If you're sort of giving donations online, if you're very sort of close-up and personal with what you're giving. And also, it's helpful to notice, and I'll come back to this in the wisdom aspect, what is easier for us and what is more difficult. So, for example, for me, particularly in a lot of my life, I've been sort of more time poor than money poor. So it's always been more of a challenge to give when people, when it's in terms of time than money. And then the sort of the giving of the gift of fearlessness. I really love this one because I think being fearful, can be quite a limiting factor for us as human beings. And obviously there are elements where we need to be attuned to what's dangerous and what's not. But quite often we're not actually having to deal with threat to life and limb and to actually sort of flee or not. But we can have a very conditioned, inbuilt sense of hypervigilance or fear, at different levels. It might be a sort of low-lying anxiety, or it might be quite an active thing. And that can be quite a limiting factor in life. It can really sort of close us down, and in that sense, give a sense of limitation or dukkha, pain. And but it is something, it's like, well, how can you give the gift of fearlessness? But actually, I believe you can, and a lot of it is around exemplification. It's something that is caught more than taught. And I was very conscious of this, particularly when I've raised 2 children who are now in their 20s, their mid-20s. And I was really conscious of this when they were small children, of trying to help them grow with a sense of confidence in who they were, and a sense of confidence in life, in the world, in being able to take risks. One of the things that came to mind was once sort of being on holiday somewhere, and there was a very high cliff that people were jumping off into water. And I don't like that sort of thing. I don't like heights. And we stood at the top, and I was thinking, well, I need to exemplify fearlessness here. So I jumped, which wasn't, and so did they, so but it is that sense of then being able to, really exemplify, being just able to launch yourself off a cliff, and another time on holiday, my daughter was probably only about 8 or 9, and we were doing a day of kayaking. And one of the things we were taught to do, because it was white water, not very white, but white, was what to do if you fall out, where you have to just lie and let the water take you to some safe spot. And so we were taken upstream and just let go in this bit where you then had to go round a rock, and the water took you round the rock. And when it came to, sorry, I'm going to get emotional saying this, when it came to my daughter's turn, she was there, and she came into the river and I held her and let her go, so that she then went down and was caught further down by the instructor. And she was shaking with fear, and I was like, you don't have to do it, And, I wasn't making her do scary things, but she was really clear she wanted to do it. And she did, and she was caught. And she was all happy at the end, because she had a shared experience with her cousins and stuff. And then when we got back, she was recounting the holiday to somebody. And she was like, and I faced my fears. So it was that, so there are really definite ways that you can do it. But obviously, that's a particular context. But I think in life generally, just by being and exemplifying that sense of confidence, of fearlessness, with some sense to it as well, I think that can really help other people to also feel that, that it gets sort of caught around. And it is important because, fear closes us, fearlessness opens us. And ultimately, when we're taught, and I'll come back to this a few times, but ultimately, when we're looking at the spiritual life, we're looking, it's a sense of freedom. That's the path. That's where we're headed. It's a sense of freedom, of openness. And that, so you can feel that. So anything that closes us down, would be associated with dukkha, with suffering, with pain. And anything that opens us up is more like the journey towards freedom. So it is an important thing to bear in mind and be aware of. So a couple of other things I wanted to pick up as well in this is I'm not going to sort of touch much on the sort of education and culture or life itself. I mean, that's an interesting concept to reflect on, but I'm not going to, and obviously it's not just about human life, and it can, link into choosing vegetarianism, for example, but there are lots of aspects to it. But the next one down that I wanted to talk about is giving of merit. So merit is a concept in Buddhism that you may or may not have come across, that good deeds build, we get merit through good deeds, punya, merit. And one of the things that we practice, and we practice it very actively and regularly within this Buddhist context, the Triratna Buddhist community, is the idea of transferring our merit, of giving up our merit, of gifting it. And we do that quite ritually. If you've been here in a sort of puja or ritual sense, you'll know that there is a verse in that's called the Transference of Merit and Self-Surrender. It's a short verse, and we often recite it. And we often recite it, for example, at the end of a council meeting, or even quite sort of practical things. And it is that sense of, okay, I've done something, helpful, intending to be helpful. And there will be a sense of merit for that, and we just give it up. We just give it up, and it's easy. I think it's one of the things that really points to me to the importance of ritual. That actually, when you give things up ritually, it's a really you can actually feel it. You can feel like a lightning. There's all this weight of all these good deeds. You just give them up, and there is also then a sense of well-wishing for others, for the world, as we do that. So the final thing in this list of what we give is giving the gift of the Dharma, giving the gift of Buddhism. And this is the end of the list. It's the ultimate one. I think it's important to say that what we mean by Dharma in this sense, in fact, Bhante Sangharakshita, who's the founder of Triratna, in the book, What is the Dharma? He says that Dharma can be used in two senses, as a principle or truth, or as well as a doctrine or teaching. So it can be much broader. You don't have to want Buddhism as a teaching, as a religion, in order to receive the gift of the Dharma. It's also a principle or truth. And he also, in the same bit, goes on to say that the Dharma is whatever helps you individually to grow and develop spiritually. And if it's alive and if it works, anything that's alive, if it works to help people follow the spiritual path. So we can see it really, really broadly. But my sense is that in terms of giving, in terms of giving time and energy, that actually the Dharma is the most important thing that I could possibly help to give or help to communicate. And that if, I suppose because of my experience of it, and I just think, well, if people have that sense of awareness, of wisdom, of compassion, then, they will make their own good choices. And that's, that's all that's really needed. So, in a sense with my life, because I've, I've tried to stop using the word busy a while ago, because it's one of those really overused words. And I also think that sometimes when we name things and call them that, it has its own sort of it reinforces it. Oh, I'm busy, you could sort of, it gives rise to this sense of, oh yeah, I'm busy. Anyway, so I'm not using that word, but, I have had in my life, for example, just being a single parent, raising 2 children, running a business and things like that. So there's been quite a lot of things I was doing. And particularly when the children were small, I made a conscious decision not to volunteer my time, because I was quite taken up with looking after them and earning money, and then, just keeping sane and fit and healthy and seeing friends and stuff. So that was quite a conscious choice, because it felt like, well, if I go and volunteer to do something somewhere else for someone else, it's going to just take time away from what was already a fairly limited time I had to parent them. But then as they, grew older and ultimately left, that opened up more time, probably about 15 years ago, really. And but in terms of volunteering time, I've chosen to do it within the context of being a Buddhist and within the context of Triratna here and in other bits as well, because it feels like that's the most valuable gift that I could possibly give, or use of my time, voluntary time. So those are the 6 things that we can traditionally give. The sort of material possessions, fearlessness, education and culture. So I've forgotten them now. Education and culture, life itself, merit, and Dharma. So I wanted to touch a bit on how and why we give. And traditionally in those lists, when it looks about how we give, it's something like graciously, timely, and wisely, or some such thing. And also, and why is, that's how, and why is for the benefit of all beings. So again, this is the Dhana paramita, the perfection of giving or generosity. It's ultimately, the sort of the perfect Buddhist and what you would do. But what I wanted to focus on here is an aspect of how and why we give, which I think is matters, because I often hear people getting really caught up analysing, particularly volunteering time, analysing why they do it, and often in quite a self-critical way. It's like, well, I'm doing it, but it's because I want people to like me, or it's because I want to feel useful, or it's because it's like I need this and therefore I'm doing it. And but I would really encourage us all to just do it, just not, those thoughts might arise, but I wouldn't spend much time entertaining them, because it's like, just do it and then just notice the effect, notice how it feels. As a practice, being aware of the fact this is a practice. It doesn't matter in a way what your motives are. And we do tend to be more critical of ourselves than anything else. So it's like doing it wisely, deciding what's realistic to give, with kindness to ourselves as well. And having an awareness of our own conditioning, what we find easy, what we find hard, really helps to make that decision. But for example, and obviously, if our conditioning is that we tend to just give and give and give without taking much account of ourselves, then you need to take that into account as a sort of starting point for what to give. But then I wouldn't worry about why, and about whether it is that, I need a role, I need to feel liked, I need to feel useful. Or, that there may be a sense of, that you feel guilty because you're more materially well off than other people. Guilt isn't ever a helpful driver. It's not a helpful emotion. It's very sort of me. I was raised Catholic, but I do remember a wonderful conversation with my father when I was a young adult and saying I felt guilty about something. And he was like, unhelpful Catholic stuff, that guilt, you don't want to be doing with that. But anyway, what I mean is like just not paying much attention really to those thoughts or the sort of the analysis of why. It's like, just do it and notice the effect on you and also maybe of others. So not overthinking it, or maybe not thinking at all. The focus isn't the thought. So it's a bit like when I dropped into that meditation, for those of you that were in this room for the meditation before the break, dropping in that sense of, looking at the heart area, maybe having a sense of openness in the heart area, and then dropping in the thought of giving something, and then maybe dropping in the thought of giving in a bit more, maybe more than feels quite right, and having a sense of seeing, where there is a uplift, sort of that sense of sort of uplift in the heart, or freedom, or letting go through giving, and where there's a sense of can't give that, the sort of closing down, and just noticing how that feels. And it doesn't matter how it feels. It's all just a practice. It's all curiosity. It's all exploration. And it's a practice that we're all fortunate enough to have access to, that we can practice. Or we can find ways to make it accessible. So it's an effective, accessible practice. We don't need to be, as I said earlier, really, really good meditator or know loads about the Dharma. It's like, just do it, just feel the effect. And it's likely in a way that the benefit of it will outweigh anything else anyway. So it's a practice. There is another aspect of this sort of how and why, particularly the sort of how we give, that I wanted to touch on briefly as well, which is that we also need to be able to receive generosity and receive giving from others. And in fact, I was aware when I agreed to give this talk today, that actually I gave a talk on generosity last year here, but it was in a different context, within the context of the precepts, the ethical training precepts. The second one is around not taking the not given, or generosity. But in that talk, I decided to focus on receiving generosity and being able to do that. So I wanted to have a different focus today, because, and again, it just depends on our own conditioning, how we've been raised, but often we can find we have a real sort of narrative about who we are and what's easy and what's hard. And for years, I had a narrative of, I was somebody who gave to others more than received, and it was difficult to give to me. But it took years to notice that the narrative actually was no longer true. I receive an enormous amount from lots of people, and mostly I do it graciously and happily. Yes, please, thank you very much. That's very nice. So the final section that I wanted to come on to in terms of this talk around Dharma, paramita, giving or generosity, is this insight aspect. So as I was saying at the beginning, any of these things that we focus on within Buddhism, just give us access to really the whole of the spiritual life. So the practice of giving or generosity gives us access to, we talk about the spiritual life as perfecting sort of compassion and wisdom, the sort of twin sort of wings of a bird or whatever that we have in Buddhism. And obviously the sort of the compassion, positive emotion aspect of giving and generosity is sort of self-evident, but there's also this sort of access to this wisdom aspect that I wanted to highlight as well. And these 4 different aspects of it. So one of them is that it can really give us insight into ourselves and into our own conditioning. And this is something to also explore with this sense of curiosity. So there isn't a sense of right and wrong. We're all just conditioned, largely by, very strongly by just the conditions of our birth and our early childhood functioning, for example, or and it's quite easy to note that, particularly around that sort of giving in terms of material stuff. You can notice what your conditioning is. So you can notice that by deciding to practice giving and then noticing what happens. Not in a, oh, I'm really bad at this, or, oh, I'm really good at this. It's just, you're just noticing. It's curious. It's an inquiry. It's a practice. It's a self-knowledge. It's a learning what it is to be this human being in the world. And for example, my conditioning, I was, particularly from my mother's side, who was sort of middle class English conditioning, one thing oh, it's only money, darling, was one of the things that we were told as we grew up. So which has some helpful aspects and some quite unhelpful aspects as well, but it was part of my conditioning. And another aspect was that my parents, particularly my mother, was very hospitable. She loved having people around and feeding them. So, in a way, I grew up with quite an easeful relationship with giving in terms of sort of those material things. But, I also grew up a bit sort of time poor. So I would notice more that it was, oh, I can't do that. That would be the closing down more than the sort of giving in terms of money. Though, money was tough for quite a while as well, but it was, but the conditioning around it isn't tough. But yours may well be very, very different, but all this is it's encouraging an inquiry, a sense of curiosity, a sense of learning, practice giving and notice what the reaction is. And then you can work with it if you want. You can think, oh, actually, I find it really hard to give this, but I want to practice this actively as a way to help myself open up. You could do that. Or, which is a more sort of developmental approach, or you can simply notice it, which is more that sort of insight, inquiry, learning, opening up type approach. So that's the first aspect, is that practicing generosity, practicing giving can help us learn who we are as a conditioned human being in this world. And based on that, we can extrapolate from that awareness, from that insight, into what it is to be a human being in the world. We may notice that, well, these are my tendencies, other people have different tendencies, not better, not worse, just different. And also being sort of open, curiosity and aware of what those are. Meeting that with empathy, with acceptance. And so ultimately there is this sense of we're getting insight into conditionality, based on conditions. Everything arises based on conditions. And when those conditions change, those things change. So however somebody is, you might look at somebody and think, oh, they're a bit mean, or wow, they're going to find this really easy. But they will be a product of their conditions, just as you are a product of your conditions. So it just helps us to sort of get a sense of what it is to be a human being. So I was just noticing my notes. There was another bit of my conditioning that I noticed, which was that as a child I got attention through being helpful. I was one of 4 and I was the eldest daughter, and so that was what I did, was I was helpful and then I got positive attention. So I'm also conditioned to be helpful. That doesn't mean have to be helpful all the time. It's just that I notice that's the sort of natural tendency, for example. But it's and there's good and limitations in that. But yeah, so we can notice these tendencies, and then we can notice them in others, and just have a sense of what it is to be a conditioned human being that is the product. Yeah, we're all the product of our conditions. And that can really just open things up. It's just like, it's not that that's good, that's bad, they do this well, I don't do this well, whatever. It's just we're all human and conditioned by those, what's happened. And then the third of these things is that through this prism of giving and generosity, we can also practice, we can also go beyond ourselves. That's the thing, is we have this sense of a sort of me, mine, that's, Zen, you could call it a sort of small mind thing. And we can also use this practice of giving and generosity to go beyond that. We can intentionally practice going beyond that, giving more maybe than we are comfortable with, I mean, what I wrote down here was it's like seeing what it's like when we climb outside the castle walls. There is this sort of castle walls of me, mine, what I need, and then you sort of go beyond that. So for me, a couple of examples of this would be, one of them again is just the experience of being a parent, which does carry on, but it's particularly when they're small, there's that sense of being unwell, and then having a child with needs in that moment, or being very exhausted, and there is that sense of just having to really sort of dig deep and go beyond and find ways to manage that. And also more recently, a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, when they'd left home by then, and I remember somebody, another sort of teacher within Triratna who I'm connected with standing in my home, now empty, saying, "Oh, you could start a community here." And what we have within Triratna, there's a sense of Buddhism as a lifestyle and making that accessible. And so at some centres you'll find that there are associated residential communities, just people living together, choosing to live together as Buddhists, as a support for practice. And my reaction to that was, but why would I? I've been dying to live on my own ever since for this moment when the kids left home, so that I would have the house to myself. But, something germinated or whatever, and I did end up doing just that. So I now live in a Buddhist community where we're four women, and sometimes we've been 5, and but not because I particularly wanted to live with other Buddhist women, but because I could, I could, and it was a good thing to do, a healthy environment and opportunity to set up. And linked to that, I think, or just the final thing I wanted to say is also that from this insight aspect, that you take that even further, and this practice of giving or generosity can take us just beyond the whole self-other dichotomy, this whole, even just the concept of this is me giving something to you, even it just can even help us to break down that or get glimpses of the fact that is a conditioned construct that we hold, and how we navigate the world, but not ultimately true. One of them, in fact, I was listening to a couple of talks when I was preparing for this, and one of them talked about liking to see money like water, that it's better when it just flows and keeps moving rather than stagnates, which I think gives some indication of this just flow of generosity that isn't about me, mine, or you and yours. And one of the things also that came to mind in this is that I had a cousin, Matthew, who was quite a bit younger than me, but he had an illness when he was about 6 months old, and he stayed mentally at sort of 6 months. He never developed beyond that. And he also had epilepsy. So he had quite a lot of needs. In fact, he didn't, as he got older, he wasn't able to live with his family. He was in residential care, though, they took him on holiday and he came home for weekends but pretty, 24/7, usually with two people, to help him stay safe and well. And he had 4 sisters. And I remember going to his funeral. He died when he was in his 30s. And at his funeral, one of the things that so struck me, because I think I'd had this assumption that it might be quite a relief for people when he died, because it was such a big aspect of their life, to look after him. And actually it was just like, no, I was so struck by what he gave, because he was like, there was so many incidences that, and I remember observing him with his sisters often, but just like a repeated, image that comes to mind of, one of them blowing raspberries on his tummy and he laughs, and it's just like this constant thing, raspberry laugh, and everybody's uplifted by it, it's just, you can't help laughing. And there was so much sadness because he gave so much, but it wasn't obvious, you get this sort of flow of just breaking down that, it wasn't about them looking after him, it was a much more, there wasn't that sort of duality of it in it. But even an aspect, you get glimpses of this, even or even in terms of a community or whatever, there is this sense of some people have resources, energy, time, money, skills, whatever it is, and some people don't, or they don't have those ones. So there is just this sense, it doesn't even feel like, oh yeah, I'm being good giving that. It's just like, well, that's what's needed. There is just this sense of, it doesn't have to be that duality. And we can get a glimpse into that. And so I really, value this principle. And actually what you will find in a lot of different Triratna settings, where there's sort of urban centres like this one or retreat centres, is that in lots of ways we operate on a practice of Dhana, a principle of Dhana, of generosity. And it gets expressed by give what you can, take what you need, which links to this thing that I was saying, that some people have resources, skills, money, time, others don't. So there is just this sense of give what you can, take what you need. And so, for example, at retreat centres, some of the retreat centres, you can go on retreat and there's a deposit which sort of covers your food, but beyond that, it's all on a basis of generosity. So it's making it genuinely accessible for people. And the same with a lot of classes here, that you would say, that it's based on Dharma. It's based on giving a donation. And that is because, it is good to offer opportunities for people to practice generosity, giving in all of these ways. It can help us really, both sort of developing those heart aspects of positive emotion, but also ultimately an insight, wisdom and insight into what it means to be, who we are as a conditioned being, what it means to be human, going beyond that and ultimately going beyond this duality of self and other. So I'm going to stop there. We have 5 or 6 minutes if there's any questions, or if anybody wanted to share any reflections that they've had on this subject.
I think it's really nice for you to talk about the not so importance of the whys and giving, because I also often hear people talk about the selfishness of the giving and almost, in some cases, almost explaining their non-giving by it, which is quite curious in a sense. So it was really nice to hear that today for me.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it is. It's really interesting, isn't it? That, as you say, that non-giving, it's just like, I'm giving you this, but, and actually it is helpful, isn't it, to encourage actually. Just enjoy giving, enjoy that. And then if there's merit, you can give that away as well. It's just like, you're not going to get stuck with it. But or even just notice it, even if there is a sense of self self-aggrandizement, whatever the word is, that's really good. You can just notice that too and hold it lightly. We're human, it's just like these are very human things, thank you.
The result is the same. If somebody gets something out of it, doesn't really matter.
Exactly,
you had something behind it.
Yeah. Thank you.
We sometimes think we're losing when we give something away. There's a picture I saw in Edinburgh in one of the galleries. There's this very poor lady by the side of this track with her children, one in her arms, two around her. And there's this tramp walking by. He's got holes in his shoes, his toes are out, and his trousers are halfway up his ankles. But he's just got a single coin and he's giving it to her. Just it's sort of, to me, it's you can always give something. You don't have to be rich to be able to give, but and it does open you up. You benefit. So it's a practice. Like if you can't meditate or you can't, can't work out all the concepts in Buddhism, you can give.
Thank you. Yes, Sumino was just, you probably maybe not able to hear that online, Sumino was just emphasising that aspect of we can always give and it doesn't have to be a lot. This example of somebody who's, very impoverished anyway, giving one coin to others who are also impoverished. I mean, I do, that reminds me that years ago I used to work at Christian Aid, and we had Christian Aid Week, and I don't know if it still happens, but you'd put envelopes through people's doors and then go around and collect money from the envelopes, which is it was a whole massive thing with lots and lots of thousands and thousands of volunteers. And I remember doing this and being in a housing estate, quite a poor housing estate, and somebody answering the door and thanking me for giving them the opportunity to give, because they were saying usually people don't bother to come here, and thank you for doing that, so it was really interesting, quite humbling.
It's interesting that there's all the kinds of giving. I think in Western society, charity equates to money. In England today, very few people starve, but a lot of people have mental health issues because people aren't giving them whatever they need, beyond material stuff.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. He was just saying about, we can think of giving money, but actually there's not enough giving in terms of time and attention and kindness, and there's a lot of mental health problems, a lot of loneliness, so there's, Anything else in the last couple of minutes? Okay, well, I shall leave it there then. But thank you all for the gift of your attention, which I really value. Thank you.